Beardy and the Beast Media Club.
Ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba. This is a placeholder intro song.
Welcome to Beardy and the Beast Media Club, a full spoiler podcast discussing a piece of media. We will not cleanse the world polluted by spoilers past. We're available here and on many other services, with a list available at beardyandthebeast.com. Give us a like, share, or join the discussion in the comments or at our Discord. My name is Drew, and as always, we have our very own feral fox squirrel, Devo.
I was hoping I'd be the feral fox squirrel.
Today we'll be discussing 1984 Miyazaki classic, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. So Devin, was the air pure or was it full of toxic spores?
I think it was pretty. I think for the most part it was closer to the pure. I really enjoyed this. It's my first time seeing this one, surprisingly, and
Yeah, well, it's not my first time seeing it. Of course, as any of these go, I never remember my first viewing.
yeah.
The first time I saw this, I know it was actually in junior high school, back in the Middle Ages. That's
Yep.
right. I was into anime before it was cool.
I believe we've discussed that on other anime we've watched. Yeah, I mean, technically this is not Ghibli, even though they've changed it to say Ghibli. This movie came out, I think, a year before Ghibli was actually created.
Mhm.
And I want to say, I respect so much the hustle that Miyazaki put into getting this film made. He had the idea to want to make this film. They said no because there's no manga based off of it. So he started writing a manga.
Just doing his own hustle to get it done, eh?
Yeah, that's just so. Even though the manga didn't finish till for a decade after, a lot of the beat points are the same and the overall themes are the same because it was the same creator. He knew what he wanted. Always wanted it as a film, and that's just amazing. And the fact that it spun off into what we've seen from Ghibli,
Well,
I can see most of the hallmarks of Ghibli right from the beginning, and that says a lot.
you can definitely see the roots, and that's one of the reasons why I introduced this as a Miyazaki classic and not a Ghibli classic. Because though it's grandfathered in, it's not technically a Ghibli, even though I'm going to put it in the Ghibli playlist because that's my hustle.
Yeah.
You definitely you can feel the roots. Well, the positive roots. This doesn't seem to have some of the negative, what I view as failings from the other Ghibli movies, such as Howl's, even Spirited Away. There was none of the scarecrow was the prince the whole time. No, it was straightforward. Everything was connected. Everything made sense. Everything was weaved together, and there was nothing coming out of left field.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing felt unnatural.
Yeah. I mean, it says a lot. I mean, he's worked on TV series before. The only movie prior to this one, I believe, was Lupin the Third.
Mm-hmm.
This is a fantastic start. And really, just when it comes to Ghibli, the only thing that didn't feel Ghibli to me was some of the music choices. That actually is one thing that threw me out a little bit. Because half the music was very Ghibli, and then half the music was very 80s.
Yes. There was definitely a attempt at period music usage,
Yeah.
I guess you could say. And though it didn't bother me, I noticed that.
Yeah.
I came out of this, I'm like, I'm feeling very 80s right now. I'm like, I really like the color palette of this movie, but it could use a little bit more neon, maybe some purple and greens.
I know, right? Apparently it was somewhat intentional. I mean, again, it didn't fully take me out. It took me out because I've come to expect a certain sound when it comes to Ghibli.
Mm.
And so that's what threw me out. It's not that the music didn't work, it's just it wasn't what I expected to be hearing.
I guess Ghibli usually has more of a classical progression feel, so it definitely always matches the story beats behind it and the way that it's pushing forward like that.
Yeah.
I mean, a good example would be like the Star Wars stuff. The
Mhm.
music is definitely developed for the film, uh, for those particular moments, opposed to being random '80s track B.
Yeah. Um, and the one thing they did do with that is like the I guess what they tried to do, as understanding, is the '80s soundtrack was supposed to be more the the Sea of Decay, and then the Valley was supposed to be more of the Ghibli-esque soundtrack.
Yeah, I don't know.
Um,
It didn't suit it. It was something that
yeah,
was kind of out of place.
yeah, and that's really it. Especially where most of the pieces are period pieces for Ghibli. It really felt out of place. Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing in the soundtrack. That and the guns. The guns sounded weird.
There was a
They
lot of
sounded very
weird.
80s again.
There was definitely a lot of weird sound effects things. Like even though it was the forest of decay, it was only decay for humans,
Yeah.
right? Like everything else in it seemed to be prospering. There was tons of flora and fauna.
Hmm.
So the lack of a wildlife sound, there was only
Yeah.
like say 3 layers of it. That's like
Yeah.
footsteps, rustling, and maybe like a cricket or something. It was too quiet for that kind of like density, in my opinion.
Hmm.
So especially where the human in the Sea of Decay is not the predator, um,
Yeah.
meaning there's no reason for those animals and that wildlife and those insects to be quiet.
Yeah. An interesting thing, just talking about the poison there quickly. I read an interesting fridge thought just when I was doing my research afterwards. And this might have been mentioned in the manga more because again, there's a crossover. Apparently, the thought is the Sea of Decay was actually clean air, but the
Oh,
humans are so used to the toxic air that it became toxic to them. Right? Especially
I
when you have creatures that large.
I don't think it tracks just because of what they reveal the growth of the Sea of Decay.
Yeah,
Because the Sea of Decay actually um, grows upwards, including the forest floor.
yeah,
So everything pure is left below, right?
and I think Nausicaa actually said something like that. It wasn't that, and this is the fridge theory, but Nausicaa does actually say something like that because she says it's not the Sea of Decay that's poison; it's the soil that's poison,
Hmm.
right? Because she had her own garden with the same things growing in it, and it was fine because it had the clean air or the clean water, the clean soil.
I mean, now that we think of it, the way that the Sea of Decay cleans doesn't actually make sense in retrospect. So
Mm.
why the forest floor and everything else is like going upwards,
Yeah,
leaving this like cleanliness below. But I don't understand how that like poisonous layer would grow up and how the forest would lift up, say, the poisonous soil. Because the way that
yeah,
the trees get nutrients would be from the roots or the base. So if we say it that way,
yeah.
then the fridge thought makes more sense
Mm.
because the clean bubble exists at the top, and then where it's where it's getting all the pollution slash nutrients from would be at the base. So
Yeah,
only way it could technically make sense is if that fridge thought is correct.
yeah.
So
Well, so there's outside of that fridge thought, the other this entered my mind while when Aspel and Nazca were in that underlayer.
Hmm.
I actually did write notice, like, I feel like there's a piece of symbolism or mythology that I was missing. Because it actually reminded me a lot of things like Dark Souls,
Okay.
right? Where you have Ash Lake and everything is above this giant bubble with a lake and all the trees are going from there, but you would never know unless you actually climbed down a route. So yeah, it made me think that there's some part of meta myth, I think, that's supposed to be tied there as well, but I couldn't quite place it.
Yeah, I didn't observe anything like that, so that would be kind of a point that I missed.
And and some of that's probably coming from, I was literally just watching some more Dark Souls, Bloodborne,
Oh, okay.
world building. Like, so, like, it was somewhat fresh in my mind, but it just reminded me very much of Ash Lake. So, uh, and generally, when you see trends like that in media, it's like there's probably some larger aspect that's culturally tied to that something. Then again, with Nausicaa being as influential as it was, it's also very possible that, you know, the other Miyazaki just took inspiration from Nausicaa for that.
That's true. That's
So,
very true. But what we learned today is Rich thoughts definitely sometimes hitting the nail on the head. It's the only thing that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
Well, at least unless there's a cultural part, because one of those things like air that's too pure is toxic to humans.
yeah.
Oxygen. So I think that's the only thing that does make sense.
Yeah.
Changed my own mind.
Well, it's interesting because there was a few things that I thought, like, when they introduced the Sea of Decay right at the beginning. I think one of the first things to note down is, like, is this really toxic or do they just think it's toxic? And I'm not 100% convinced that it's toxic because we've seen multiple times with, like, Nazca not having her mask on in there and there wasn't negative repercussions for it.
Could have been a quality thing. No, I think they established at least some point in the life cycle of the Sea of Decay that it is toxic.
Mhm.
It may not be in the primary forest, but the way the sea spreads is the insects go outwards and then they infest a town and then they perish and then their spores are toxic to the people that are there and then it grows. So that might be part of the life cycle. So fully grown um, sections of the forest may not be toxic, whereas newly developing maybe. But
Yeah, that's
it's kind
true.
of theoretical
Um,
at that point.
yeah, because the other way I was thinking is, like, it might have been toxic at some point
Hmm.
because I think they established it's been like 1,000 years that they've basically been living like this. So maybe and it's really just because we see Nazca without her mask at least twice in there, and they mentioned someone or something else.
Her father had become bedridden after being exposed to like too much of the toxic environment. Granted, like
Mm,
they had kind of rudimentary science from what I could
yeah,
see of that culture, so it's possible that he might have had another ailment that was being
yeah,
misdiagnosed as related to. But like sometimes like tribal science can be very direct. Like I can't remember where the tribe was, but whenever they got headaches, they would eat this kind of plant. And there
yeah.
was a naturally forming type of, I think it was ibuprofen inside the plant. So
I think willow bark has a set of metafin.
there we
I
go. That's
think it
probably
was.
what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah,
So like I have to operate on the thought that it is toxic. So
yeah,
if they had released a sequel where it was like, oh, it wasn't toxic at all, that was just a myth to prevent people from going into the forest to and provoking the insects, which would then go out and attack the people living around it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I definitely think that it was toxic. It's the, was it still toxic?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So that was just a thought, and
Well, what
kind of followed up on by like in the post-credit scenes, you actually have, I think, Yuba goes into the forest again. I don't think he had his mask
what
like
they
after the bug attack, etc.
what they could have done. The problem is how lush they made it and how green they made it look. Made it look
Mm-hmm.
clean.
Yeah.
They made it look fine. So there was a like not there wasn't any visual indicator when they were in the forest as to it being toxic or deathly, aside from like, you know, this flying flatworm thing has sharp teeth.
Yeah.
Like even though Holmes didn't really look all that aggressive, they had to make the eyes red to make them look mean. Uh, but well, that's which, and it's weird. That's something that they could have done, but overall, I really liked. It's the first thing I noticed was the colors. Like
Mhm.
the palette was very nice. It was well thought out.
Yeah.
I read something they used something like 263 colors over the course of the film,
Yeah.
and I think they spent a lot of time actually balancing it and making sure that the colors actually correspond.
Yes.
And alongside of that, like the animation style was very dated. It's in a warm, like comfortable way, maybe in a nostalgic way. But you notice like a good example is The Secret of Nim.
Yeah.
That animation was very dated and was hard to become absorbed in.
Hmm.
But the way that they did it in Nausicaa here, maybe it's just because I'm like used to Ghibli movies and they've definitely kind of have a formula at this point.
Yeah.
But aside from the graininess, it didn't feel 80s. I would even say
No,
like late 90s is the way it felt.
it's that one thing that I know we've talked about with Ghibli films before. Like they just have a timeless feel to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like just the way it's done. And I was actually thinking of making a comparison to Nim as well. Because it's interesting because these movies are basically contemporaries. I mean, they're only what, a couple years apart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting notes like while there was a lot of that same look in the backgrounds between them, you couldn't tell necessarily a part was going to be moving in Nausicaa
Mm-hmm.
like you could in. So I mean, I guess even that's just kind of that evolution of the animation at the time
Mm-hmm.
because there's so many that it's like, oh, that's the part that's going to move.
Oh, like when the thing that's gonna move is a slightly different color.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's one thing that like my mind is from Saturday morning cartoons as a kid. Like I notice immediately, and thankfully that wasn't the case here.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, I guess you still see garbage like that on in anime when it's like an anime when they're doing like a filler arc, the animation quality just like drops completely, and you do see
oh yeah,
stuff like that. It's
yeah.
like, oh, he's
You know,
using
you
his
know the
special
difference
martial
between.
arts technique, and like everything is static except for like one arm that's
Yeah,
rotating, and it's a slightly different color. I'm just like,
yeah. Like I get it. It's a filler arc. You're trying to save a little bit of money, but did you need to save that much money?
and
um, uh,
that's and that's always on like the big ones, right? The
oh
ones that
yeah,
have made bank. So it's like, why even?
yeah.
It's probably a
It's
time
all right.
crunch thing. They need to get it out as quickly as possible, so the attention to
Yeah.
detail is less.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we didn't need 52 episodes a year of Naruto. Maybe they could have taken a break. Just a month. um, uh,
That's one of the reasons why I'm glad they didn't pick up The Breaker as an animated series yet,
Mm,
because the writer and the artist take so much breaks doing it that
yeah.
like it wasn't as bad as say Berserk, but it
Mm,
was pretty bad. Every 1 in 3 months there was like just like a month-long hiatus for no reason,
yeah.
which is funny because the show is called The Breaker and it's always taking breaks. Anyways, my point there is if that was an animated series, they would end up having just ridiculous amounts of filler because of progression of the manhwa.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's
Well,
that's something completely
done
unrelated.
for now.
Anyways, yeah, that's coming out this year, so I'm excited though.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, the third season. But
Mm.
speaking of combat, I do like the small amounts of recognition of the past in the show and how the world came to ruin.
Yes.
Like these, and the way that they presented it being so mythical.
Mm,
I would have almost preferred if the giant warrior at the end was, say, a little bit more mechanical looking, opposed to being like, I guess you'd call it biopunk.
I'd almost call it an Eva.
Uh, wouldn't you call an Ava whatever one of these were?
Yeah, that's true.
I
The
mean,
reference there is the person who actually made the giant warrior is the same guy who did Evangelion.
it's interesting because one of those things is good. I'm pretty sure it's this.
Ava was good. Shaking his head at me.
No, I'm sorry. It has to be said. Shinji is a little d-wad, is what he is.
Oh yeah,
He's a
completely.
he's a moody little jerk. His dad gives him a giant robot and gets him to hang out with two like super attractive girls his own age. And he just sits there whining the entire time. I'd be doing backflips and my giant robot.
It's
Something about a
funny.
series where you can't even closely even potentially identify as the primary protagonist.
Uh, Interesting story because we're obviously tangenting on this a bit. I ended up watching Rebuild of Eva because the fourth one finally came out, and while Evangelion is getting the damn robot Shinji, Rebuild is all don't get in the damn robot Shinji.
See,
It amused me greatly.
that would make more sense. It's like, oh, there's this giant robot, Shinji. Oh, but you're not allowed. You're not allowed. I'd be moody at that. I'm the pilot. Why won't you let me do backflips in my giant robot? That'd make more sense.
But more on topic, I immediately noticed that I immediately thought that the Evas were based off of this. I didn't realize how directly until I was looking afterwards and realized like, oh, the person who did that is is the same person who made Ava.
Well, even
Um,
the laser blast effect from the mouth, the way
mhm.
that it like cut across the ground and then the laser exploded,
Yeah,
like that impact area. Like that's pretty much how they do lasers in Ava.
except it wasn't a cross explosion.
For the better. The It makes sense. I like how little there was of them though, and
Mm,
how it does kind of suck from a story point of view that so much of it was built around the resurrection of this giant warrior and preventing it and obtaining it. And that seemed to be such a major plot line for the periphery characters
mhm.
that it took out like three alms and then melted.
Yeah, I felt a little a little let down from that. Letdown isn't quite
It's
isn't
just
quite the right term.
it's how the buildup was, because if they had pushed more of the mythos of the blue-robed man and the bird,
Mm,
opposed to like introducing it briefly and then just kind of going with that being the fulfilling method. I mean, I prefer the way that it ended. I wouldn't have
mhm.
wanted it to like, Nausicaa tames the giant warrior or defeats it directly or something like that. I wouldn't have liked that. That would have taken away from
Yeah,
this film. But
yeah,
the they introduced a mythos, and then all the periphery characters were based around like a different mythos. Granted, more rooted in what their reality was, but
mhm.
like you're following that huge arc and it ends up to be nothing.
Well, I mean, while the giant warrior didn't wasn't effective there, I mean, it still was the main catalyst, and they did explain that they basically woke up the warrior before it was ready.
Yeah, see,
So it made sense that it only got a few shots off before.
yeah, that's not the part I have problems with. That part I
Mm,
actually really appreciate.
yeah,
It just, I think, I mean, it was obvious from the beginning. You probably could tell right at the beginning where they were introducing the mythos of the blue robe man with the bird. And you're like,
oh yeah,
especially the way that it like paused on Nazca's face, and she was kind of looking in the same direction as that the storytelling image or whatever. You're like, oh, it's gonna be
yeah,
Nazca in the
yeah.
end.
Oh, obviously,
But they could have worked that in a little bit more.
yeah. I think. See, I don't.
That's that's probably the root of where freaking Ghibli storytelling ended up coming from. Oh, we'll just give him a little tidbit at the beginning, and then that'll be the thing at the end.
I
And
mean,
then
that's not a. That's.
the scarecrow was the prince the entire time.
I mean, that's pretty common though. It's like it's set up for something to come in much later. I really don't think most people actually knew much about the mythos except for Obaba,
Well, so I'm saying
the
it
blind
like it
woman
needed
telling
just
them
more
everything.
foundation for it from a
Yeah.
story progression point of view. Um,
See, I almost think that it would have. I don't think I'd appreciate it being brought out much more. Honestly, it's because it's a world myth, so it's used to kind of explain a bit about the world overall. It's used for that world building. Here's the myth of the hero who did try to unite, and then having it come back. Whereas I'm trying to think how to phrase this.
well, the thing is, like, there was no like symbol of the blue robe man. There was no tapestries. There's nothing in the background. Um, the story itself was self-contained at the beginning, and then at the end, there was nothing that was like containing it, except for the fact that it was
Mm,
Nazca. So that's what I'm saying from a story progression point of view. It doesn't transition well, and that's what allows the giant warrior to overshadow that entire arc.
right.
It's just it's awkward.
Okay.
Um,
I see where you're coming from. Um,
but I mean,
I don't
is
think I quite agree with you, but I definitely can see where you're coming from with it.
compared to the structure of other Ghibli films, this is definitely a whole lot more cohesive.
Mm.
At least things make sense.
Yeah.
I did I did have a moment I had to go back because I had missed something. Because she was wearing these bright pink robes. And then all of a
Yes.
sudden at the end, she was in blue robes.
Yes.
Like this, where like so I had to go back and I'm like, am I crazy? Were they pink? And then the way that they changed the color of the robes was so fantastic once I had rewatched it, having
Mm.
it been from the blue blood of the baby Om, having dyed it
Yeah.
blue. The like I really appreciate that transition, even though I didn't notice ahead of time and had to revisit because of it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's like the only time she wasn't wearing blue was with that red to blue. So definitely I kind of missed the change to him. Like, what happened there?
She was wearing pink.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen in other movies like Silent Hill,
Mhm.
where that is purposeful, but they literally start it from the first scene and change it so you don't even realize it's changed.
Mhm.
Um, like I just like the idea of that. Yep, this blue robed thing is because it's drenched in blood, walking down these golden feelers from instead of a golden field of wheat. Going back to the tapestry image.
Yeah, and I appreciate like the connection that she had. They definitely had her have that kind of natural or like connection with nature and that
Yeah.
feel, and they like established that early, which was nice, and they showcased that along the way. The thing that I didn't understand when it came to the Nazca character herself was the whole like just her constantly like with her arms outstretched in like the like kind of a crucifix stature. Why is this making all the young men stop what they're doing and abandon what they're doing? Like it happened with the pilot and it happened with the gunner in the little like Eggman ship.
All right. So I I think what it is it's the idea of the hands up. She's showing herself um as not being a threat. And one thing I noticed, I've actually noticed this with uh, Kushina. All of the princesses look the same. Like
Oh.
they all look related. Like I honestly thought that Kushina would have been like her mom or something
Hmm.
because like there was just enough of that same like hair coloring and similar eyes. So because you got to remember when they stopped shooting at her, they specifically said um Lestral. They said her name each time.
Oh, I
The
guess, and
princess
if
was the
they did look the same and she was wearing the clothing of a main of the Khajiit kingdom, and
yes.
if they do look similar, that would make sense why the young the young boy would be like would stop shooting. Because
Yeah,
he even said, "Yeah, I remember that moment, but I didn't connect it."
yeah. And when she was doing it to the floating egg cup ship,
Yeah, that's what
they
I was
didn't
thinking.
stop shooting. They didn't stop shooting her. They did shoot her.
There
And
was
she jumped at them anyway while she was being shot.
well, and that's when she did like the cross thing.
Yeah.
There was a hesitation because like the boy did that same thing, said her name
Yeah.
there. I do wonder about what's her name?
One.
The warrior princess.
Kushina.
Kushina? She seems to be a person of contradictions. I'm not saying this in like a negative way. She's very strong, and she's obviously seen a lot, and in combat, like even lost an arm. What they implied,
Possibly both legs.
possibly. As soon as she was confronted with like an unknown circumstance, specifically in when they're in the forest, and like she just kind of like shuts down. She acts out, it doesn't go well, and then she just stops. It was just this weird character contradiction that I noticed that I don't I don't I don't know if I would have liked her to continue just being headstrong. Perhaps it was that moment where her character changed, because she did seem more receptive at the end of the film, even though she made bad choices.
So
Just a complex
I
character.
see. Yeah, definitely complex character. I saw like the being quiet part, not so much as out of place. I actually saw it as very in place
Hmm.
for the character because she's battle hardened. Clearly, it wasn't the time to battle, so don't bide your time. And then, as soon as she had the opportunity, she freed herself from the restraints
Okay,
and left.
that makes sense.
Um, yeah. The other thing that I find is because I see a lot of the same types of things actually with Nausicaa as well. And I think the characters were meant to be mirrors of each other, much in the same way as Sana and Lady Eboshi was
Mm.
in Mononoke. And because like you have Kushina, who's definitely the very battle hardened and doesn't have a problem going into battle,
Mhm.
but can go calm. Then you have Nausicaa, who is clearly, the pacifist type. She's more about the life and protecting life. But holy crap, can she fight?
Yeah,
Right? Because you could almost argue her going out and basically wiping out a squad of people on her own,
of warriors, no
and is
less.
only stopped. Yeah, and is only stopped because Yupa literally takes the blade in his arm, and that's what it takes to calm her. Is like, okay, she's got that same contradiction,
Mhm.
right? So it's that same side of, or different sides of the same coin, almost.
I think that's a good analysis of like the two characters juxtaposing them against each other. They
Mhm.
do definitely come off as mirrors of each other.
Yeah.
But makes it kind of suck that we didn't get to know the Pajit princess
Yes.
at all. Because I bet you there'd be like an interesting interaction there. I guess for the story, it wouldn't have made sense and it would have made it cluttered, but it's an interaction that I would have liked nonetheless.
Apparently, there's a lot more of it in the manga.
Mm,
A lot more of her character. I was reading and it was saying that it really shows off that two sides of the same coin a lot
mm,
more. Because it also shows apparently the manga can actually get quite bloody,
mm.
and
Who would have guessed?
Nausicaa, yeah, and Nausicaa is very, very much a brutal combatant. Like they say, like she's literally second only to Yupa, the guy who was feared, known across all of the other countries.
Well, and that's one thing that fully made sense to me just from the background and the things that you could see. For instance, when you go down to Noska's secret room, Yupa had to kind of weave his way around a bunch of old armor and weapons
Hmm.
and broken gunships and things. So this is a breakaway culture that came from a warrior culture
Yeah.
that had taken up peace and serenity in this valley. It's clear the entire culture, like all the men, women, and children, are all capable, and the regular civilians can fight and are willing to do so.
Oh yeah.
Actually, one of my favorite scenes is when the two women like push aside the soldiers and then start chopping down the wood with like I think one had a shovel and one had an axe. They're like,
Yep.
"Don't give a crap that you got swords and guns. We need to do this right now." And just like push them aside.
Yeah. I like the fact they were so like they knew how capable they were, because the Baji guys are like, we don't want to give them their tools to try to save the forest because we know they can use them as weapons.
Well, when
And then they do.
when well, you got to think also their experience is a 90-pound girl that is like a person in this village just took out like seven of their warriors.
Yeah.
Like it's it's kind of important to recognize that that would spread by word among the troops.
Yeah.
And these were the warriors that were also traveling with the princess of their culture.
Hmm.
So they should be some of the most capable ones.
Yeah. Yeah. That's,
So it just highlights how much Nazca kicks ass.
yeah. She really does. Um, the other scene that like just really hit me for how much Nausicaa kicks ass is when you have this 90-pound girl holding up a 90-pound minigun at the end of the film and go, no, we're doing this.
Oh yeah. The LMG. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember that.
Just like, she would, and I just, no doubt in my mind, she would have no problem using that if she had to.
Yeah, I think she'd brace proper. I wonder what kind of training she had. Not that it was just like, bet you in the manga it would express more.
So apparently, in the manga, Yupa is the person who taught her to fight.
Hmm.
So
Like knowing that, it's interesting seeing the comparison between how they fight. Like Nausicaa has very much got an animalistic side, but one of my favorite scenes is you put like flying through the air with like his hands on the hilts of his two weapons, and like he lands, and every movement he does while combating with his dagger and his sword, look, were animated in such a way that they were calculated and they were precise.
yes,
Like there was no wasted movements. Everything was exact in how it was compared to Nausicaa, which probably more like a cornered badger.
mm. Well,
I mean, more
I'm going to use
efficient.
that as yeah, definitely more efficient. Because it's one thing that, as a overall theme, that I don't feel quite got explored as much as it could, was the idea of rage and fear and those emotions,
Mm,
because that's very much what Nausicaa was representing in her fights, was like pure rage, right? And then the Ohms do the same thing, and it's just, but I don't think they explored it quite as much as they could have.
it's interesting. I don't think it was like a primary theme. It was definitely secondary or tertiary. But I do agree that they could have expanded on it.
Especially because they
Like,
mentioned it so often.
and it's not like Noska was like struggling to keep back the rage. She
Yeah.
had the one bout and then was just like, I mean, panicked occasionally, but pretty low range, like even tempered throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah.
So interesting. I
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to make a small change to this that I think would improve they would expand upon that a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really it. Because like, there's just there's enough aspects around it. So,
Even the squirrel fox.
yeah, the squirrel fox, the Ohms,
Mhm.
was that similar thing. Just blinded rage. Um, and it's easy to see how Mononoke was meant as a spiritual sequel to this film,
Mm,
because there's the similar themes there, and I noted this almost right off the get-go, how similar like the Ohms were to the Kami
mm.
in Mononoke, and they just played on that little bit better. That the idea of the corruption and how to keep that serenity around the corruption. Uh, that's partially why I think they were trying to do that here, and just didn't quite have it fleshed out as much as it should. It was just casually mentioned too often to not have that impression.
Mm. Yeah, I think Mononoke definitely explored it better. However, I think overall, I appreciate Nazca in its entirety more than Mononoke. It just there was just some weird choices in Mononoke and some weird wastes that kind of take away from it, like especially like forced romance and things like that.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. If they made Nazca nowadays, they'd probably end up trying to like do a forced romance plot with what's his face and Nazca.
Yeah.
And
Y-
this movie is far better without any type of romance plot at all. It's
Yeah, it
like
doesn't need it.
I, I don't actually the majority of movies that I watch, it's like I don't care if she likes him or he likes him or whatever bullshit. Like unless the movie is about their relationship, I don't actually care that much, because it's
Yeah.
so that's like people are so much more than that.
Yeah.
You know, their interests, their life experiences, their likes, their dislikes. Like it's just one piece of the puzzle that makes a person. So when they, I think having a romance plot in Nausicaa take away from it.
Oh, I agree completely. And I'm very glad that they didn't do that in any way. And if anything is like you got the idea of them being friends and or almost that familial type relationship, especially where they're seeing the resemblance of the sister and knowing that she did what she could to comfort the sister when she was dying.
Hmm.
So I appreciate how they did that.
It's also nice to see like another movie with like a lot of flushed out, strong female characters being like the primary protagonists and antagonists. I, if we compare in that aspect this film to Mononoke, I think this film does it better.
Yeah. Uh,
Though
again, I think
I do like the antagonist from Mononoke better. What's her face?
Iboshi,
Yeah,
Lady
she
Iboshi,
she
Lady
real
Iboshi
good.
is awesome.
She real good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like because you
Um.
don't have a reason to dislike Kushina.
Yeah.
You just kind of do because she's like she's got tanks and guns and like some of her warriors killed a dude. Granted, the father of the protagonist, which is an important caveat, but um like her personality wasn't unlikable,
Yeah.
especially in the second half of the film where she was like, "No, I want to hear what Nazca has to say."
Hmm.
Like what occurred, like it was even almost like she was giving Nazca a chance to resolve
Yes.
the entire situation.
And that's I agree. I think and I think this just so shows the strength, the growth that's happened with the Ghibli films
Hmm.
overall, right? Because in I don't think the concepts between Nausicaa and Mononoke are that different.
I
Like
agree.
I was seeing parallels. I was seeing parallels throughout, and I think so. If we take oh, I can't remember his name from Mononoke.
Oh, the useless prince.
Yes, the useless prince. um, like that's a negative to Mononoke because here we didn't have that character. We were following the character who was actually making the changes.
Mm.
Um,
Well,
but
Mononoke. I mean, argument could be made from that movie that she wasn't really the primary protagonist. She was more of a force of nature within the film.
mm, for song,
Whereas, yeah,
yeah,
whereas, I mean, my preference would have been if she was the primary protagonist and it followed her more directly. I think it would have
yeah,
been an enhancement on the film.
I agree, and that's where it's going to go because the rest of the character work that happened in Mononoke, I can see it as being the expansion of what they were trying to do with Nausicaa.
Hmm.
Like again, I saw the same connection between Iboshi um and Kushina. Like they were both
But
kind
she
of
was so much better.
yeah, but I can see Kushina
Like parallels, yeah.
being basically it's the prototype of,
Yeah.
and they managed to just make it more complex in Mononoke. But I think they were trying to go for the same thing, but they didn't have the same. We didn't get quite the same emotional resonance around it, uh, and I'm not even quite sure why we're missing that resonance. I guess maybe it's just because it's so overt. The like what the man-made um what the factory was doing to the environment, it was so clear, whereas in Nausicaa it was more happenstance that Kushina ended up having to take over the Valley of the Wind.
Yeah.
And it honestly could be something as simple as that that helps flush out Eboshi as well.
That's true. That's true. This movie, speaking of like flushing out things, this movie does something really good as far as drawing me into the world. It makes me wonder about the other cultures.
Mm,
Like the technology of the Valley of the Wind, the Pajit, and whatever uh, the country that
Tolmakin or something like that.
yeah, Olmecan, very different looking technology, customs, that sort of thing. It made me really wonder, like even about the daily lives of people in those kingdoms,
Yeah.
especially when they said
Yeah.
like the Pajit kingdom had like the Great Dome, and that was something that was really important. They mentioned that
Mhm.
like even that fell. So what's the cultural significance of that? So that really kind of pulled me into the world,
Mm.
and I find that a very positive thing.
I agree. Yeah, the world building was like, as soon as I realized there was a manga, it's like, well, I've got something I need to add to my reading list right away. Because of the same thing, it's like I do want to know more about this world. It, it's it's such an interesting take on that post-apocalypse,
Mhm.
right? We have we obviously see three different cultures at the surface dealing with it very differently. We see again the Valley of the Wind and Nausicaa's people literally just trying to work with the land, whereas Pajit clearly further away and tried to tame, try to control the land, I guess. And in a way they did, because it sounds like they basically controlled the Ohm to do what needed to be done. And you've clearly got this militaristic Tolmakin.
Now that you mention this, this actually kind of frames the like the rage and the fear, because even those two countries, the Pajit, um, originally unearthing the warrior to use, and then also direct the rage of the Ohm towards the
Mhm.
Valley of the Wind, them representing the rage, whereas the Tomakin, even though they appear to be far more militaristic, their technology seems to be more basic than the Pajit.
Yes.
The Tomakin, their actions were out of fear of what the Pajit were doing.
Yes.
So, um, yeah, that kind of just reinforces what you were saying earlier. It's just something that I
Yeah.
just thought of now.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things that where it's there, it's just not explored as well as it could have
Yeah,
been.
agreed.
And again, I just have to keep comparing it to Mononoke because we basically had a similar um, Mexican standoff in Mononoke as well.
Hmm.
Right. We had Eboshi, we had the shoguns, and we had basically San, all kind of doing that same thing, and all kind of just playing off of the yes the three the central themes in that one. There, watching I can't remember San's mother's name, like trying to be that balance while we have these other
Hmm.
sides just caught in a war.
It's interesting, like, just to go back to the very beginning of the conversation, how much this shows the framework going into the Ghibli movies
Mhm.
after. Like this definitely inspired and influenced the works of the entire studio going ahead,
Yeah,
except for maybe Earwig.
yeah, but I mean, so apparently Tales from Earthsea. When we ever get to that one, that'll be another interesting one,
Oh
from
no.
what I hear. Um, I mean, it's one thing that I find interesting as we've explored the Ghibli films that we've watched so far. I've noticed that a lot of the misses seem to be films that are adaptations.
Mm.
Howl's, Earwig, um, are adaptations of English books by the same author, and or Hayao Miyazaki is not the director of.
Mm.
Right? I mean, we know Like, I mean, we know Spirit Away, Mononoke, they have their issues, but overall they stand up as solid pieces. Just something to notice, the ones you tend to crap on more so than not are the ones that aren't this Nausicaa formula or not the Mononoke formula.
I mean, crap enough that it's a meme
Yes.
by now. I'll tell you that what though, this one is definitely not a miss. So much so that I would only give this one 3 red omais out of 14.
I'm curious, did you count the eyes on one of them?
I did.
Nice.
And then I confirmed it from another picture of a different home to see if there was, because like sometimes they'll draw them with changing eyes amounts.
Yeah. I appreciate that. um no, I agree. It's it's just very very tight, very well done film, and for this to be essentially his debut film,
Hmm.
I mean, he set the bar high and generally sits around the bar.
Yeah, I think so.
Like, that's impressive.
And so this film, when I originally saw it, like it was actually my homeroom teacher in junior high school, grade 7. I was already familiar with anime, so I was like, why is my teacher showing us an anime film? In retrospect, it was probably because he was trying to get us interested in the environment and environmentalism.
Yeah.
And I can see that's where like my concerns for things like water conservation and just being not just a terrible polluter. Like I do my best. I'm not
Yeah.
preachy about it. That's probably where a lot of the bassists come from. Basi, the bassists.
You know,
Dum, dum, dum.
boom, 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 boom.
So like having it impacted me from like a young age, and it has that kind of timeless classic feel. And I would firmly, it's a tough one. I gotta ask you on this one. If you had to choose this one or Mononoke, just one of them, to recommend to someone, which one would you choose?
Oh, that is a tough one. I'm leaning slightly towards Mononoke. While I prefer Nausicaa as a protagonist, again, it's a lot of the themes that were trying to be done in Nausicaa were just done better in Mononoke.
Hmm. And I agree.
So,
I like Nausicaa better. It's just something about it that I enjoy. Maybe because it's not 12 hours long. Um, but the themes are more well explored in Mononoke, and it also has like a film and an animation style that is more accessible,
yes.
especially to someone who might not be fans of the art style.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely something that's more approachable for the
Normie,
the normies. I was gonna say non-weebs.
is there a difference?
Yeah, there is a difference because I'm no longer a weeb, but I'm definitely not a normie.
Yes, but you were a weeb. Ex-weeb is still not a non-weeb.
You have no proof.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely have to go that way. Just overall, it's both of the films do things, a lot of things, very right. It's just again, like the character development with Eboshi and just how complex they managed to make all the antagonists within Mononoke kind of puts it up that just that little bit more. It showed the complexity that this one was clearly trying to show, just that step up. And other than, useless prince. uh, overall, I think that works better. Um, one thing I'd like to note as we're talking to that, because I mean, both obviously have that environmentalism feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's clearly part of the message. I know I said this during Mononoke as well. It didn't beat you over the head with it being an environmental message.
Oh, I love it. I hate when any film just ends up being a activist soapbox.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, as soon as you start preaching to people like that, they just turn off their brains.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear it. It makes you, they both make you invested in the cycles of life in these worlds that they've created without turning around and being like, because you, the watcher, are human and you contribute to this, you're an evil person.
Yeah.
And that's a quickly growing trope in new media, at least in Western new media.
Yes. Well,
And
we
I mean,
were
it's
raised with that. And here's your very special message with the cartoons we grew up with. Surprised me that much.
it is also nice to watch a movie where ahead of time someone involved in the production, like the writer or the actor, it's nice to not have them come out and start crapping on fans immediately, even before the film is released. That's nice too.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I gotta say it. I'm pretty sure at this point, every time that's happened, the movie has actually been terrible or the show has been terrible. And I think it's just pre-cover or the
Yep.
bad reception that is about to happen because they know that is just
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. I agree. I think we actually talked about that a little bit in Resident Evil. um,
Anyways,
I, um,
moral of this
yeah.
story.
Um,
I
clean water's good.
Yeah, clean water is good. Like, don't leave your taps running, turn off your
Yeah.
lights, recycle, try to compost.
Yeah.
But like, if your neighbor doesn't
When
do
you're
it, don't
telling
yell
us,
at them.
yeah. And I'm really glad that this one has the message without beating you over the head. And I was worried at the very beginning when I saw the World Wildlife Foundation endorsement of the film. I'm like, oh, is this going to be preachy?
The answer is it's the mid 80s. No.
Yeah, that is true. Um,
I mean, I watched Battlefield Earth and that wasn't preachy. Anyways, before we tangent again, good movie. I enjoyed it.
yes.
And Fiend. With that, this has been Beardy and the Beast Media Club. Join us next time where we discuss The Craft. As always, if you like what we do, like, sub, share with your friends, or join us in the conversation in the comments or at our Discord. Later.